A bitter wind clawed the ridge as dawn's first light struggled through swirling snow. Each flake bore the sting of freezing needles, and the world beyond Lone Pine Ranch lay buried under a white hush. Caleb Thorn sat astride Dusty, his roan stallion, the creak of leather and crunch of hoofbeats the only notes in the icy silence. Frost crusted his beard, and the edges of his worn duster flapped like frozen banners against the sky. He rode out from the warming hearth of his cabin at first warning of a stranded wagon near Frost Hollow Pass, a report that had come too late for most to heed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. The pass itself gaped between jagged pines, a narrow draw where drifted snow formed treacherous waves across the trail. Dusty's hooves slipped at times, but Caleb urged him on with gentle authority, eyes fixed on a dark shape hunkered against a battered station wagon. Its wheels lay half swallowed by drifts, the canvas cover torn and flapping. As he drew near, what had looked like a bundle of rags resolved into a woman and a child, bodies shivering in frozen despair. Caleb dismounted, boots sending up puffs of powder. He knelt beside them, the wind howling through the empty valley like a wounded animal. The woman's eyes, glazed with frost and fear, opened at the sound of his approach. She pressed the child closer, small form curled against her side, muffled beneath a salt-stained shawl. Caleb's heart tightened at their gaunt faces, cheeks as pale as snow and lips blue with cold. He drew his wool blanket from his saddlebags and wrapped it around them, the heavy cloth crackling in his hands. "I'm Caleb Thorn," he said, voice rough through the gale. "You've been out here since the storm came?" The woman's breath came in shallow puffs, her teeth chattering like broken wood. She nodded once, eyes flickering with gratitude and dread. The child stirred, a weak whimper escaping between frozen lashes. With urgent care, Caleb lifted them both onto Dusty's broad back, woman clinging to the saddle horn, child pressed against her chest. He settled onto his own seat, reins held tight. "Hang on," he murmured as Dusty plunged through the drifts, each step a careful promise that they would not be left behind. The ride back was measured terror. Wind buffeted them, and the station wagon's distant silhouette receded behind the swirling veil of snow. Yet each hoofbeat carried a thread of hope. Caleb's mind raced with particulars of the ranch. Hot stew simmering at the stove, the iron stove's promise of warmth, his old medical chest filled with bandages and liniments. At the cabin's sturdy door, he dismounted and guided the woman gently inside. The door groaned as he pushed it open, and a flood of pine-scented heat spilled into the pass's raw chill. Inside, by firelight's soft glow, the woman sagged onto a wartime cot, the child climbing beside her. Caleb slipped off her sodden shawl and wrapped her in fresh blankets, his practiced hand steady as he checked her pulse. "Drink this," he said, offering a tin cup of honeyed tea. He dampened a cloth and pressed it to the child's feverish brow. The tender ministrations, so simple yet so rare in these unforgiving lands, carried a gentle power that thawed the immediate edge of despair. By the heart's warmth, the woman's eyes regained clarity. "Thank you," she whispered, voice husky. Her name, Lila Hart, emerged in broken breath. She had been fleeing a debt collector, her husband's misfortunes chasing her across the endless plains. The child, a boy named Samuel, clutched her side in silent trust. Caleb watched them, his own grief stirring beneath the fire's glow. He remembered his sister's death, caught in a winter flood that left the creek swollen and merciless. Her laughter, once bright in his very cabin, had vanished with the frost. Since then, solitude had been his refuge and his curse. He stoked the fire, bellows stirring warm air across the floorboards. Outside, the gale raged against logs and windows, but here, in the circle of lamplight, a quiet reckoning began. Caleb fetched his medical chest, antiseptic, salve, bandages, and set about treating Lila's frostbitten fingers. Each careful knot of cloth, each drop of warmed liniment, was an act of defiance against the cold world beyond. Lila's gaze followed his motions. "I didn't know how long we'd last," she confessed, voice trembling. Storm came faster than expected. Our horses, they bolted. Samuel stirred, eyes half open, and she pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "He's safe now," Caleb assured her. "And you will be, too. You'll rest by this fire until the storm passes." His words, simple as a prayer, wove a fragile promise that the world outside might yet yield to compassion. Yet the ranch's frontier challenges lay far from over. As Caleb finished securing Lila's hand, a distant thud sounded, a lone hoofbeat cutting to the storm's roar. Through the window's icy panes, a silhouette appeared, a lone rider, dark against the swirling snow. The stranger paused at the tree line, torch flickering in gloved hand, eyes seeking refuge. Caleb's jaw tightened as he exchanged a look with Lila. In that silent moment, the storm's fury seemed secondary to the unknown waiting outside. He rose and flicked off the lantern, plunging the cabin into shadow and anticipation. Dusty's distant whinny carried on the wind, a reminder that outside lay threats both human and natural. As Caleb crossed the threshold to greet the stranger, Lila clutched Samuel's hand, watching the firelight dance across crumpled logs and unspoken fears. The abandoned mother and her child, saved from the storm's edge, now faced the deeper chill of human uncertainty. And as the door cracked open on the shape of a single rider, the promise of shelter teetered on the edge of what might come next. Thus, with storm and unknown converging at Lone Pine Ranch, Caleb Thorn's quiet resolve and Lila Hart's resilient hope took their first tests, her survival hinging on his willingness to risk all, and his redemption bound to the mother and child he would not abandon. A low creak echoed to the barn as dawn broke, the first pale light slipping between frozen boards to gild the straw with quiet gold. Snow drifts pressed against the lower walls, and every breath in the dim interior was a cloud of white. Caleb Thorn stood in the center of the stall aisle, arms folded across his chest, watching the woman kneel before a shattered harness. Her fingers, slender and deft, wove thin strands of leather through a broken buckle, knotting each end with precise care. The sharp tang of oiled hide and the faint tang of pine smoke from the stove beyond drifted together in the frosty air. Lila Hart paused, sweat glistening on her brow despite the chill, and slipped the repaired bit through its strap. She tested the tension with a firm tug, then looked up at Caleb coolly. "It'll hold," she said. Voice steady though her eyes betrayed a storm of worry. She straightened, the worn shawl she'd wrapped around her shoulders in station, now draped like a talisman against the cold. Underneath, her coat hung open to reveal a simple homespun dress, dusted with snow. Samuel hovered behind her, clutching her skirts, eyes wide at the improvised workshop of splintered wood and scattered tack. Caleb crossed to the corner where a spare halter lay, picking it up and inspecting Lila's work. He shook his head in faint marvel. "Reckon you've a gift for this," he murmured. "I've never seen leather mended so quick." His voice carried the echo of the ridge's emptiness. He touched the cold wood of the stall post, as if anchoring himself to this moment of cooperation. "But your pass, you've not told me why you were in that pass alone." Lila paused, gaze slipping to the stock of harnesses hanging on the wall. "I've no mind to speak of old troubles right yet," she replied, tone firm but not unkind. "Samuel and I, well, it's enough that we needed help." She scooped up a silver-laced buckle and snapped into place, each click resounding like a dropping gavel. Then, without waiting for Caleb's nod, she retreated to gather the rest of her tools. Caleb watched her every movement, the barest curl of his lip touching memories he rarely voiced. He cleared his throat and gestured toward an empty trough. "I'll fetch water," he said, voice low. "You rest a bit." He slipped out through the barn door, each step a measured vow to learn more of this woman who had mended both harness and hope. Outside, the ranch's kitchen cook, Molly Dunn, ladled steaming tea into black tin cups. The air inside the cookhouse was thick with the smell of cornbread and bacon grease, a stark contrast to the biting winds battering the barn. As Caleb stepped in, he saw Lila taking Samuel's hand, guiding him to a rough bench by the stove. She knelt beside him, her gloved hands deftly unwrapping a swaddling blanket to expose small, numb feet. With gentle pressure, she applied more of Molly's warm lard, a folk remedy for frostbite, and wrapped his toes carefully. The boy's wincing relief was a testament to her skill and compassion. Caleb placed a cup of tea in Lila's hand and lingered near the table. He hesitated, then spoke quietly, as though to confession held close. "Lake overflowed in '78, he said, staring into his cup. "Ranch flooded, and my sister, Nora, she went out into the night to check fences. Never came back." He looked up, frost catching in his lashes. "We owed every dime after. Bank nearly took this place. I lost her and nearly lost everything." Lila's hand hovered near his, tender understanding in her gaze. But then her brows furrowed, and she turned away. "I understand debts," she said softly. "I've fled mine." She took a slow sip of tea, the hot liquid steaming against her lips. "But I won't cause your ruin." Her words, laced with unspoken history, hung between them like fragile ice. Molly cleared her throat, ladling more tea for Samuel. The boy sipped gratefully, eyes half closed in comfort. In that warm glow, the pain of past winters seemed momentarily held at bay. Yet through the window's frosted panes, the ranch's perimeter fences stood gaunt in the snow, silent guardians of the edge of isolation. Later, as the sun climbed, Caleb led Lila back to the barn where Samuel petted Dusty's muzzle. She draped the harness over the saddle and tested the stirrup. Each motion was confident, as though she'd been living on ranches for years. Yet her reluctance to speak of her debt smoldered beneath the ease of her demeanor. Caleb leaned against a post, regarding her with quiet scrutiny. "You're more than a wandering mother," he said. "Your hands carry skill that ain't learned overnight." He eased a hand into his coat and pulled out a small, folded paper, a notice of cattle lost in a spring flood, the sum owed printed in black ink. "This debt," he said slowly, "almost drowned me. I'll pay it off in time, but I could use help around here if you'd stay." Lila's eyes tracked the paper like wary birds. After a moment, she folded it again and tucked it into her pocket. "I'll stay," she said, voice steady, "but only until spring's thaw. I've promises keep beyond these ridges." Her words were both an acceptance and a boundary, delicate as the locket she now held between her fingers. Caleb nodded, respecting her terms. He signaled to the rusted tack rack. "First order," he said, "will mend gates before the storm returns." The barn doors groaned open again to reveal the sprawling yard beyond. Snow-laden rails, twisted wire fences, and the churning churn of cattle searching for feed. Together, Caleb and Lila set out across the corral, hammers, planks, and wire in hand. Wind whipped against their backs, biting through layers of wool and canvas. With each board measured and each strand of wire tightened, their teamwork grew in silent coordination. 2 hands shaping a future from splintered wood and stubborn metal. Samuel trailed behind, gathering spare nails with eager hands, cementing his place in this fragile partnership. As they paused to survey their work, Lila adjusted the worn shawl at her throat, her only keepsake from before the pass. The wool was matted with snow and sweat, but she smoothed it gently, a ritual to keep her past close without letting control her present. Caleb watched the motion, understanding in the smallest gestures. They returned inside just as the fire guttered under the heavy stove pipe, lantern light dancing across icicle-crusted walls. Caleb topped the flames with fresh pine and turned to Lila. The glow illuminated his lined face, and her eyes softened at the sight. Before either could speak, a faint snap sounded in the yard. Caleb's hand tightened on his revolver. Lila's gaze flicked to the barn door. Samuel huddled at her side, eyes wide as the outer door creaked in a sudden gust. A lone set of hoofprints led up to the threshold, too large for any local rider, their shape uncanny in the snow. Caleb exchanged a quick glance with Lila. In that tense hush, the promise of shelter trembled. Outside, the wind howled through the eaves, carrying the echo of pursuit and peril. Lila lifted her chin, gripped firm on Samuel's hand. "We stand," she whispered. Caleb nodded. rounding up the ranch hands for a shared vigil. The lanterns flickered on the ridge, marking the approach of a new test, one that would demand every ounce of their resilience and the fragile bond forming between them. A sharp wind sliced through the ridge as dusk fell, whipping snow into furious arcs around Lone Pine Ranch's weathered barn. Inside, the creaking of timbers echoed the tension in the air. Caleb Thorn stood at the door, rifle unshouldered, listening to the crunch of heavy boots in the drifts. Beside him, Lila Hart pressed her shawl tighter around her shoulders, its frayed edges a reminder of a long flight from debt collectors. The flicker of lantern light cast their shadows tall against the walls, a fleeting comfort before the storm of danger closed in. From the ridgebank below, 6 figures emerged, a cluster of lean bandits with rifles slung low and eager eyes glinting in the gloom. Their leader, a gaunt man with a braided mustache and a scar cutting across his brow, stepped forward and leveled his Colt at the barn's threshold. "We've come for our due, Thorn," he called in a rasping drawl. "Hand over 20 head, or we make our own claim." His horse stamped impatiently, horse's snorting breath steaming in the chill air. Caleb braced himself against the stall post, jaw set. "You won't find what you seek here," he replied, voice calm despite the pounding of his heart. "These cattle feed my sister's boy and me. They're no man's by right of taking." He motioned to the ranch hands crouched behind stacked feed bags. Jake Simmons, brandishing a rifle, and Molly Dunn, shotgun in hand, her apron stained with stew and grit. Lila's gaze flickered to Samuel, huddled behind Molly, clutching a tin cup of strong tea. She stepped forward, shawl swirling like dark smoke. "Bandits," she said, voice clear as a winter stream. "I've tended wounds in outlaw camps, winter fever, broken bones, fever from frost. You owe more than cattle." She lifted a small cup of steaming tea. "This brew soothes the mind and warms the blood. Share it, and give me till dawn to prepare more. Then you'll leave with no man dead, or starve in these drifts." The bandit leader's mustache twitched. He eyed the teacup as though it might be a trap. "A healer's trick?" he snarled, stepping closer. "Do you know who you're offering mercy to?" Behind him, his gang shifted, boots leaving half-melted footprints in the fresh drift. Lila held her ground, breathing shallowly. "I offer help, not harm," she said softly. "My debts chase me here, debts from a flood that ruined my husband's farm. I'll not see more lives lost for coin." She caught Caleb's eye, and he nodded, trusting her judgment. Molly moved beside Lila, lowering the shotgun barrel. "Let her speak," she urged. "We'll stand by her." The leader's shoulders sagged slightly. He took the teacup and sniffed. A wisp of steam curled upward, carrying the balsamic scent of mountain mint and conifer needles. He brought it to his lips and tasted. His face, hardened by lawlessness, softened minutely at the warmth blooming in his chest. Jake lowered his rifle, exchanging looks with the other hands. Caleb exhaled, the barrel of his own weapon settling toward the floor. "We've no quarrel with dead men," the leader said at last, voice hollow with exhaustion. "Give us the brew, and by dawn we'll ride east." He gestured to his men, and one carried forward a battered tin cup. Lila poured carefully from her flask, a blend of pine buds and wintergreen, and ladled it into the rustlers' cups. Each man drank, the tepid liquid hissing on frozen tongues. Then, without warning, the leader flung his empty cup into the snow. "I'll honor your offer, stranger," he said, "but watch the ridge. We'll not forget." His men mounted and melted into the dark beyond the barn doors. As the final lantern light vanished, Caleb shut the doors with a thunderous crack. Dust and snow swirled behind them, but the wind's fury was contained. In the sudden hush, Molly exhaled, her shoulders sagging. "Never seen bandits barter with tea before," she murmured, voice wry. Lila sank onto a bale of straw, hands still warm from the teacup. Samuel crept to her side, leaning against her skirts. She swept a kiss across his hair. "We bought a night's peace," she said quietly, "but dawn brings decisions." Her gaze drifted to her shawl, nestled on the bench, the only keepsake from before Frost Hollow Pass. Caleb joined her, removing his duster and setting it aside. He pulled a folded letter from his breast pocket. The bank's final demand for his ranch's mortgage. The edges were wet from snow and worry. "This weighed on me," he confessed, voice low. "If I can't pay in spring, Lone Pine's lost." He tapped the letter's crease. "I can't ask more from you, only offer a chance at haven." Lila reached into her pocket and drew forth a small, tobacco-stained note, a vow from early days on the run, promising her husband's farm would be paid by spring. She unfolded it, smoothing the creases with care. "I once trusted such words," she said softly. "They left me homeless when the flood came. I won't fail you now." She tucked the note back into her shawl. Their shared silences, heavy as the barn's timbers, wove a fragile trust. Outside, the wind scraped against the walls, as though knocking for the rustler's return. Caleb rose to his feet. "We'll fortify the barn and muster horses at first light," he said. "Together." He extended a hand to Lila. She took it, her grip firm and unflinching. Their partnership, born in life's harshest moments, had taken root like saplings beneath snow. Outside, the ridge faded to a cold horizon, and distant hoofbeats rose again, closer, more urgent. Caleb and Lila exchanged a swift glance. The night's fragile truce had ended. He swept his coat from a corner, preparing for the inevitable. "Hold firm," he instructed the ranch hands, voices echoing off the frost-coated beams. "For Lone Pine and the hope we've woven." As they prepared defenses, nailing shutters, rigging lanterns, and saddling horses, the wind's howl intensified. Samuel, bundled in Lila's shawl, clutched her hand. "Mama," he whispered, voice small as snowfall. Lila gathered him close, warmth radiating from her calm presence. "We'll be safe," she promised. "We stand together." Caleb glanced back once more, the ridge's silhouette a stark promise of the storm yet to come. In that charged stillness, each heartbeat thundered like a war drum. Then, from the barn-shadowed courtyard, a single, desperate shout rang out, a call that shattered the barn's fragile refuge and catapulted Lone Pine Ranch into its fiercest trial yet. A bitter howl broke the stillness as dusk deepened, rattling the barn shutters and sending stray sparks dancing from the cookhouse stove. Lone Pine's cattle, huddled in the corral, raised low moans as 6 shadowed horsemen swept through the battered gate. Their leader, a lanky man with a broken jaw and lantern slung low on his saddle horn, raised a gloved fist. "We're back for what's ours," he growled, voice muffled by the wind. No more parley. Behind him, ropes tumbled like dark vines. In that heartbeat of dread, Caleb Thorn anchored himself against a splintered stall post, Colt in hand, eyes narrowing in grim resolve. The bandits urged the cattle through the open doorway, ropes ensnaring sleek hides and heavy hocks. Dusty, Caleb's roan, burst from the barn's shadow, braying a single alarm. Molly Dunn, shotgun raised, stepped forward only to see the beast driven out into the swirling drifts. Lila Hart, shawl tight about her shoulders, watched with clenched fists. Beside her, Samuel clutched the brim of Molly's apron, wide-eyed at the unfolding seizure of their fragile haven. As the last steers filed through churned snow, the leader reined his mount at the threshold. 40 head, he barked, nostrils flaring. "Sign here." He threw down a grease-stained note. "Or we brand him instead." Beneath his duster, the battered parchment lay splayed. A tally of Caleb's herd, penned by ruthless hands. The wind whipped it into the air, pages skittering like wounded birds before the leader's men corralled them and trod them into the drift. Lila stepped into the barn's narrow beam, her shawl's frayed ends trailing behind her like a banner of defiance. She retrieved a chipped porcelain cup from a shelf and filled it with steaming tea from Molly's kettle. The bittersweet aroma of pine needles and wintergreen filled the stillness. "Your ledger calls this all yours," she said, voice steady as a flintlock's click. "But omits the debt your kin left me. That shawl," she laid a hand on the fringe wool at her throat, "was my brother's. He died for cattle lost to flood and debt. She poured the tea into tin cups, each drop hissing in protest. "Drink this, then leave in good faith." The leader's scarred cheek twitched as he eyed the brew. His men stiffened, hands drifting toward rifles. But the wind's sudden lull held them fast. One by one, they accepted the cups. In the steaming draft, harsh faces softened. The leader swallowed, spitting the dregs into frost. "You're a hard woman," he said. Nostrils flared from cold and surprise. "We'll hold these cattle till sunrise, then ride east. No more blood tonight." As the bandits mounted and melted into the ridge's silver haze, Caleb closed the barn doors with a crash, sealing the night's fragile accord. He exhaled the tension from his lungs and bent to scoop the grease-stained note from the floor. Lila touched his arm. "They yielded," she whispered, "but not forever." Her shawl trembled at her throat, the lost kin's token now a pledge that her past had become the spine of her courage. Before dawn's faint promise, a lone rider crested the ridge, a bank agent in a threadbare duster and scarf askew. He guided his buckboard into the courtyard, ledger in hand. "Interest due," he called, lantern beams slicing the barn's shadow. No mercy for mortgages. In his eyes burned the same ledger's cold math that had once cost Lila her home and Caleb his sister's inheritance. He dismounted, boots leaving hollow prints in the corral's churned earth. Caleb met him at the steps. "I've paid by dawn," he said, voice low and steady as hooves on ice. He laid the bandit's note, "Will hold," beside the agent's ledger. "They've agreed to leave. Will you agree to wait?" For a moment, the agent's gaze flickered from the note to Lila's shawl. Then, with a curt nod, he tucked his ledger under his arm and climbed back into his buckboard, the lantern's glow receding into the storm's edge. Inside, Lone Pine's men gathered before a rough map carved in pine plank. Plans for a modest homestead expansion beside the cabin. Caleb spread out sketches of log walls and root cellar, and Lila traced the lines with a gloved finger. "This clinic room here," she said softly, "for Samuel's coughs and Molly's bruises." The ranch hands, rifles stacked in a corner, leaned in, eyes bright with shared purpose. The locket-shaped knot in Lila's shawl lay on the table, a silent seal on a partnership born of storm and strife. Outside, the gale resumed its assault, wind slicing across the ridge like a blade. But beneath the cabin's battered roof, plans took root. Timber to fell, stones to haul, walls to raise. The shawl's last frayed edge, pinned to the map, fluttered once, then stilled, a final benediction. As hammer met wood and hopes took shape, Lone Pine Ranch stood reborn, bound not by cattle ownership but by the fragile, unshakable thread of trust between a rancher and a mother he dared to save. Frost cracked under boots as dust bled over the ridge, each step sounding like a brittle promise in the falling chill. Lone Pine Ranch's barn door swung against the wind, and lantern light glowed faintly through narrow slats. Inside, Caleb Thorn, rifle in hand, waited by stacked hay bales while Lila Hart adjusted her shawl's knot. Its frayed edge is now a cherished relic of loss and survival. Behind her, Molly Dunn loaded a double-barreled shotgun, fingers steady despite the tense hush. The night stretched taut as rope, every breath a fragile thread. Outside, hoofbeats thundered down the corral drive, 6 bandits returning under moon's pale eye. Their leader, scarred and smirking, spurred his horse to a stop and threw down a blood-stained rope. "Your cattle," he snarled, voice hollow with greed. "Time's up." The lantern light flickered across his boots, caked with the churned ruts of stolen herds. One by one, his men hauled in tethered steers, their breaths steaming like miniature ghosts lost in the cold. Caleb stepped forward, iron carved into a stance. "Those cattle weren't yours to take," he said, voice low as ice. "Banks lien don't give you claim." Each landowner's debt lay in frost-caked papers, cruel arithmetic that swallowed homes. Now, the bandits counted their bounty in raw hides and broken promises. Lila emerged from the shadows, tea kettle in one hand and a battered tin cup in the other. She lifted the cup to the bandit leader. "Drink," she said, husk of authority in her tone. "This brew, Well, steady your mind like it steadied him. She nodded at Caleb. Then you'll see what's true. The leader hesitated, his men's rifles dancing in the lantern glow. Yet at Lila's unwavering gaze, he raised a cup. Bitter steam spiraled around his lips as he sipped. The bruised pine thorn tang and wild mint warmed his chest like a small flame. His men watched, rifles uncocked but still poised. Lila kept her voice soft. Your claim rests on false titles, she said. This deed, she held up the rope-battered note, belongs to a rival rancher. You've been lied to. She tapped the cup again. Taste the truth in your veins. The leader spat the tea into the snow. Hot filaments sizzled. He glared at the note with fury, confusion flickering through his narrowed eyes. I reckon we've been played, he muttered. No cattle here for us. He signaled his men to release the animals. One by one, the steers bolted into the dusk, hooves thunder echoing across the ridge like liberated hearts. Caleb holstered his rifle. You find your own way out, he said, voice firm, and leave Lone Pine be. The bandits melted into swirling snow, their retreating lanterns flickering across the ridge before vanishing into the night. In the sudden calm, a lone rider crested the corral's edge, bank agent Mr. James Crowley, ledger in hand, horse's flanks frosted white. He reined his mount to a halt and dismounted, boots echoing in the barn's hush. Your cattle have returned, he said, voice clipped, but your debt remains due. He extended the ledger, ink smudged with cold and calculation. Caleb met him at the steps. By dawn's first light, he replied, my note will be cleared. He tapped the bank agent's ledger. Your brother drowned in that flood, mid-'78. Reckon you remember? His tone softened with empathy forged by shared loss. Crowley's eyes flickered with memory. Childhood summers by a swollen river that took his kin as it roared. Crowley swallowed, nodding curtly. Family loss is the cruelest debt, he admitted. We'll wait. He tucked the ledger under his arm and mounted without further words. His departure's echo faded into the cold expanse, leaving a fragile peace in its wake. Inside, under flickering lanterns, Lila retrieved her shawl from where she draped it on the hayloft rail. She knelt beside a small sapling Caleb had planted the day after the storm, the first root to take hold in frozen soil. Laying the shawl in the sapling circle, she pressed it gently into the earth. Rest here, she murmured. May your threads be woven into sturdy roots. The shawl, once a symbol of flight and fear, now sheltered new growth beneath falling snow. Ranch hands gathered in the barn center, dusty overalls replacing rifles, saws and hammers in callous hands. Jake Simmons used a crosscut saw to trim new logs, while Molly fetched buckets of nails and heated tar. Samuel, now 6, carried small boards to the brew house, where they'd first brewed tea to parley with bandits. Each limb of the structure rose under their concerted labor. Sturdy walls for storage, steep roof lines for shelter, and small windows to admit light. Caleb and Lila stood back, surveying the homestead's pulse. The barn's new fixtures glowed under the winter moon, and each log's cross-section glistened like polished bone. Their breath rose as vapor, swirling between them. Molly offered Lila a cup of sweet tea, piping hot and scented with chamomile. Lila accepted with a nod. Her eyes met Caleb's in a shared moment of triumph and relief. Outside, the wind had stilled, leaving the ridges outlined sharp and clear against star-speckled sky. Lone Pine Ranch, once on the brink of despair, thrummed with renewed purpose. The final hurdles, bandits and bank, had been met with compassion and courage rather than blood. In that victory, partnership had been kindled. 8 years later, Lone Pine Ranch's silhouette stood proud against Montana's rolling hills, under a broad veranda roof. Caleb Thorn leaned on the railing, eyes on lush pastures where cattle grazed in sunlit meadows. Lila Hart, her shawl long replaced by sturdy homespun jackets, guided Samuel, now tall and strong, into the clinic's threshold. The small whitewashed building, adorned with brass bell above the door, held shelves of tinctures and stacks of cloth, a beacon of care born from frontier necessity. Inside, Molly Dunn bustled among patients, ranch hands with dull injuries, children skittish after flu, and neighbors drawn by the promise of healing. Lila moved from bed to bed, steady hands applying herbal salves and bandaging fresh cuts. Her warmth and skill had become legend across the territory, the woman who negotiated with bandits and buried her grief to bring hope. Caleb stepped forward, tipping his hat before joining them. Samuel set a tray of tea and biscuits by Lila's side. She smiled, threading her needle for a patient's torn sleeve. Caleb sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. No vows had been spoken, but their partnership, built on shared trials and tempered by winter's worst, had grown stronger than any contract. From the porch, Jake Simmons rode dusty down the lane, delivering news of new homestead plots for flood refugees. His call echoed in the crisp air. Caleb rose, exchanging a look with Lila that needed no words. Together, they stepped into the sunlight, clinic bell tolling softly behind them. On a small knoll atop the ridge, the sapling they planted stood tall, its branches dancing in the summer breeze. Beneath it lay a weathered shawl, woven into the earth, its fibers feeding the roots. That shawl now guarded not only a tree, but the resilient legacy of a mother and rancher who faced storm and outlaws with compassion and resolve. Lone Pine Ranch thrived. Cattle healthy, fields turned, clinic open, its heart beating in steady hoofalls and whispered thanks. And in the golden light of evening, when wind cut like a blade through open doors, the partnership of Caleb Thorn and Lila Hart stood testament to survival, redemption, and the enduring power of hope on the untamed frontier.